Good afternoon, guys. This is Natalie Pierre from the State Journal Register. Here today to have a roundtable conversation, with this being a year to the date that the protests started following the day after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Today in our panel, we have 3 people here so far. We're going to try to see if we can get the 4th to come on in a little bit later. But first, we have Springfield Police Chief Kenny Winslow is here to be a part of this conversation today. So, Chief Winslow, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me today.
Of course. And the next person we have is local activist John Keating, who's also here. So, John, welcome. And then we have a local therapist, Tammy Otomayo, who is also here to just weigh in on the mental health aspects of all of this. And the 4th person that will hopefully be able to join us later if she's able to get off the floor is Senator Doris Turner. So really today just wanted to come together to have a conversation about where we're at as a community a year later. We've seen the protests, we've seen some policies, we've seen a lot of conversations, but kind of a where do we go from here? And so really, I'd like to start with you, Chief Winslow, just looking at this last year with the protests, in your role, how the voices of the community, what you heard, what you took away from that, and some of the things that you've done just to this point to try to address some of the concerns of the community in terms of police brutality and systematic racism.
Well, again, thank you for having me today. Obviously, the George Floyd incident was a traumatizing and tragic incident that occurred in our country that created and sparked difficult conversations and a review of best practice and a review of policing in America and across the country. And, I'm proud to say that the Springfield Police Department, as we reviewed a lot of the things that have been discussed at both the federal and state level, are already implemented in our policies and procedures as we consistently strive to provide quality service and follow best practices. Our community came together to mourn and was hurt, and a lot of feelings were out there, and, they did it in a peaceful way, in a way that protests should be done, respectfully, peacefully, and that's why their message is being heard around the state, and we've seen it in other places where it didn't quite go so well. And one thing, whether it's fair or not, what happens in law enforcement, no matter if it occurs in Ferguson, Missouri, or if it occurs in North Charleston, South Carolina, New York, wherever, it affects law enforcement across the country. And we all evaluate. One thing we do at the Springfield Police Department is that we try to learn from these incidents occur across the country, as well as within our own department, and make those learning moments for our department about what can we do. Let's evaluate this. Let's see how we can do this better. We don't make the same mistakes or issues, and we learn and grow from it. When we talk about specifically George Floyd's case, I don't know of a police officer out there, a police chief out there that looks at that video and thinks what occurred was nothing more than a crime. And, obviously the courts have agreed with that. Derek Chauvin, has been found guilty, and the system worked. The system worked. And we've seen that in some other cases too. Laquan McDonald, Walter Scott. There have been those cases. Again, when we look across the country, there's certain things we learn, and there's certain things that you just can't defend. And that, I always tell people, when you look at the Derek Chauvin incident or the George Floyd incident, I don't know anybody that was trained that way. I can't speak for what Minneapolis PD does and how they train their people, but obviously their chief came out and said that's not how they train either. So again, it's just an unfortunate situation. But what we've done in response to that, obviously, immediately in response after, there was a lot of comments and questions from the media, from the community about what are your practices? How do you train? So doing that educational portion throughout our community. We also put out what I call our pledge to professionalism. That's on our website that people can get to. We released that through the media to put out there to show what we do and how we do it. We understand in our profession that you always continuously have to strive to improve and do better. And the only way you can do that is by reviewing your current practices, as well as comparing them to new, innovative, progressive practices that make our profession better and our community safer. And that's what we're really looking at. And we've taken a lot of that stuff. When we look at the national level, what's in the George Floyd Policing Act, most of that we already do. The state reform bill that many people refer to, that goes into effect July 1st, most of that we already do. There are some things that we are working right now as we go through our policies and procedures that need to be changed. We were proactive, myself and the Illinois Chiefs Association, to get the decertification process strengthened up as part of that bill. As with anything, no bill is perfect. There's some concerns that we have with House Bill 3653. It was passed that we would like to see a trailer bill clean up, clarify, and potentially even change a little bit. But overall, it's not all bad. It's not all good, and that's the way all bills are. I don't think anybody feels that way. There are things in the bill that's going to make our jobs tougher, yet, that's part of adapting and moving forward. But there are some things that we hope that we'll get some changes on. But those are kind of some of the things we've done with having those difficult conversations. I've participated in many throughout our community, sat on boards, sat on things just to talk about it and have these conversations. Our partnerships that we have with different grassroots organizations in our community that we meet on a regular basis. One good thing that came out of this, we hadn't really had quarterly meetings or monthly meetings with BLM. We now have those on a monthly basis or every other month basis, or if something picks up, the leadership knows they have my phone number. They can pick up the phone and call us. And so it's led to a better understanding there. So again, as far as the community, the big issue I think that we have to deal with in law enforcement, it's not a popular thing, it's not a common thing. And we've been doing it for the last few years through our partnership with Noble and our partnership with the NAACP, is educating the youth and educating our public as a whole about their rights, so they know their rights. Because what we see in a lot of these situations is they escalate because people think they know their rights and they don't. But doing that education portion, that we've been doing that with the District 186 as well, just trying to get that out there so we are all educated, so we can avoid these type of confrontations. We often say, the goal is for everybody to go home. The citizens, the officers, we don't want these things to escalate. And then make sure that we try to, if you got a grievance, grieve it later. The side of the road is not the place to grieve these type of things. Grieve it later, and that's what we try to do here. Additionally, like I said, the review of our policies, we posted all of our policies online. Anybody can go see what the Springfield Police Department policies are by going to our website to be transparent in what we do. We've always done de-escalation training for several years, scenario-based training, simulation training, etc. We've enhanced that, to do more of it. But again, that's kind of what we've done as a brief overview.
No, thank you. And, I'll go to you next, John, just in terms of how we bridge some of the gaps between the community and law enforcement, and can move forward in a space where there can be, some sense of trust, because a lot of that trust has been broken. And as we know, since George Floyd wasn't the last person to die unarmed at the hands of police. And so how do we move forward from your perspective and, even just approach this in a better way? I know you've had some thoughts just about a more holistic approach to our community.
It's difficult. Immediately after George Floyd, there were a number of extremely substantial and effective conversations about how to move forward. There were ordinances passed through City Council, and like Chief Winslow said, most of the things in that, I think everything in that use of force ordinance was already policy, so all that did was codify it. And there have been conversations going forward, but there also have been a number of incidents over the last year involving Springfield police officers that have tracked heavily against any trust that has been gained, as well as how the department has handled some of these instances. For example, just recently over the last weekend, suppressing free speech, actively suppressing because it's still blocked on their social media pages. The courts have established that government entity social media pages constitute public forums. And if we are going to not be able to freely speak in those, if that's going to be shut down by local law enforcement, then how can we trust that when they have the education that they're going to be accurately teaching people their rights if they're not protecting them themselves? So it is a difficult conversation, and I hope that we can move forward with things. But the issue that we've seen mostly is transparency and action to stand up to the accountability that's been said that would be had.
And Tammy, I definitely want to get to you. I do want to give Chief Winslow an opportunity just to address some of what John just said in terms of, do you feel like there are things you guys could do to be more transparent? I know in terms of some of the legislation that you guys just mentioned, that you guys have been doing, the body cameras, the mandates there, the ban on chokeholds, some of those things. In some respects, you've been ahead of the curve on this at a state level, on a national level. But in terms of transparency, are there areas or things that you guys are still working toward, Chief Winslow?
Well, we have a transparency page even on our website. We're proud of the transparency we do. Our social media policy is in line and reviewed by our legal corporation counsel, and within guidelines of that. So obviously, if there's an issue there, we'll check with them. To go along with that, we're a law enforcement. People aren't always going to agree what we do and how we do it. And I'll say this, unfortunately, use of force is ugly. It's always ugly. Additionally, we are a microcosm of society. We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes over time, and we're going to hold our people accountable for those mistakes. We're going to try to learn from them and move forward. We comply with all FOIA requests and everything that's required by the law. We have these difficult discussions in the community. But with that said, things are going to happen. And there's going to be a difference of perceptions and opinions of what occurred. And, unfortunately, police officers are called to events when they're often out of control, often when it's somebody's worst day. And that's why we're being called. And so when we come, we're not in control. Sometimes the public thinks we are in control. We're not. We're coming there trying to bring some kind of resemblance of calm and peace to the situation. And most of the time, we're very, very successful at that. We average about 130,000 calls for service per year. Last year with COVID, I think we were down to like 113, 114,000 calls for service. But typically, we average somewhere around 130,000, 125 to 130,000 calls for service a year. And we use very little force. I believe last year in 2020, we used 153 incidents of force above normal handcuffing, which could be a joint manipulation, could be an escort, etc. I believe that we used a taser less than like 11 times. I have to go back and get the stats, but I think it was 11 times last year. We didn't use any deadly force last year. Additionally, I think we used mace 6 times. So think about that. You're talking less than 20 times that we used any kind of impact weapons or force above normal handcuffing. And we publish those things on our website. We track those things. We try to learn from them. So again, I'm sure there's always room for improvement. We'll do the best we can as we move forward. We always strive to do better, and we always try to review what we're doing and move forward. But the thing I would like to say is that use of force is always ugly, but just because it's ugly doesn't mean it's inappropriate or unjustified or illegal.
And Tammy, I know for you, just from what Chief Winslow said there, sometimes they enter into a situation, it's a crisis situation. And I know you and I spoke for another story that I'm working on just about racial trauma and some of those things people don't even understand. And so when you're in a crisis situation and then you have a police officer, can you just speak to what racial trauma can look like and how it can maybe be triggered or exacerbated when you do have interactions with police based on consuming media and seeing things like George Floyd on your TV screen?
Yeah, I want to demonstrate something with a click and a clap, click, clap, click, clap. When I click, you're going to expect to clap in the next point and that's how trauma works. Whenever we see things on media, whether we like it or not, we're being traumatized and we're expecting something to happen after that. And that's the reason why some cops react, and that's the reason why some people react. Now, with trauma, there's a difference between how people react to those traumas. If you have trauma and then you have power, you're bound to have a fight response, right? If you have trauma and you don't have power, you might have a fight, flight, or freeze response. So what I'm trying to explain right now is we are being traumatized. Cops are being traumatized. People are being traumatized, and everybody's just reacting, and no one is responding. And until the trauma is addressed, we're going to continue to have this problem over and over again. And one of the best ways to do so is kind of the systematic desensitization. we need to humanize ourselves. There's no reason why I should not know the name of the cop that patrols my neighborhood every day. We need to organize meetings where we can all talk, we can get introduced each other to one another so that we become human. Because when that happens, in the context of police reform, when everybody comes together and talks, right, we can form solutions. And I can give one example. I used to work at a rehab, and in the rehab, I had people who were millionaires or people who did not have any money from different socioeconomic statuses come together in a room in an outpatient building. And over time, what I see is, at first, one individual is like, oh, this person is pretentious. This person is just this rich person. And another person is like, oh, this person is that. But after a while, they begin to think like, because we all have the same similar experiences. So to become human, one of the things that was adapted in my university was forced integration. And forced integration means, for cultural diversity, is our university forced us to expose ourselves to people who are different from us for a period of time so that we could understand. And that same principle can be applied in today's society and in context of police reform. Let us get to know one another. Let us get to learn each other. And that can reduce the trauma through systematic desensitization.
Thank you. I think that was very well put and well said. Winslow, one of the things in your pledge to professionalism that you published in August following George Floyd's killing was, talking about your co-responder program, where you've got someone from Memorial Behavioral Health going out and responding to a crisis situation with an officer. And speaking to a couple of your officers that are a part of that program, they talked about just the benefits of that and how it allows them to serve the community in a way that previously they couldn't, handle some of those calls on their own because they weren't trained necessarily to that extent to handle a crisis at that level. In that pledge to professionalism, you mentioned more maybe partnerships and efforts of someone from social services along with police addressing needs. What are some of those things that you've maybe come to, or have you come to other opportunities to kind of partner so that the best people are arriving to some of these calls rather than just a cop with a gun who is in a situation where it's already a complete crisis and they're maybe not the best person?
Yes, thanks for the question. Unfortunately, with our process that we have currently, it's not a 24/7 thing. We are actively in talks with the Memorial Behavioral Health and other medical professionals about a partnership, seeking some grant funding to expand those services. I wish it was a 24/7 service. It's just not. I will say that the Memorial Behavioral Health and the other medical services, SIU Medicine, HSHS, they are great for working with us. If we have a crisis situation, say a barricaded gunman or a suicidal barricaded subject, the psych response team will at least have a phone call with us, take our calls 24/7, where we can get some additional information from it. But what we would like to see is them responding during those type of situations. And there has been on occasion where they have. What I will say is our officers are trained in CIT. We were one of the first departments in the state back in 2003 to adopt CIT and bring it to the state of Illinois. Now it's seen as a nationwide standard for law enforcement. And many of the departments participate, and there's several that don't, So with that said, I think we have about 75 CIT officers right now currently on the department. Additionally, all my hostage negotiators or crisis negotiators are trained in CIT as well. So we're doing better than most in that aspect, but we're not medical professionals, And so having that resource available to respond 24/7 is something that we're looking at. And we're also looking at just basic ideas. I don't want to reveal too much, but we're looking at how can some of those calls be deferred from the police department to others? Because one thing we notice about in government, if there's a societal ill, we try to legislate our way out of it. And usually that ends up falling on the police department's plate because we're the only 24/7 organization that's available to respond to calls for service. There's a lot of stuff I'd like to take off our plate that really isn't law enforcement related, but we do it. We've had to put a lot of stuff on our plate. Our Safe Passage program to deal with addiction, we had to bring that out so we could break down some of these barriers to treatment and the red tape and get people into treatment. But sometimes before you can get them into treatment, they got to realize they got to admit that they have a problem. They need the treatment. Additionally, whether it's the homeless problem that we deal with, many of the people we deal with that are homeless are suffering from mental illness as well. How do we handle that? How do we deal with that? But we had to start a homeless outreach team to try to deal with that and train our neighborhood police officers to assist with that. So again, none of these things are criminal in nature, but it's stuff that the police department consistently get called to because nobody else is available 24/7. So as we look down the road to the future, it is my hope that, at least here locally, maybe we can obtain some of that grant money, because that's what it comes down to. It comes down to cost and personnel. Maybe we can obtain some of that grant money to help us move forward and improve our process. But in the meantime, we know we're the ones that are tasked with responding. So we have to do our best to train our officers up to the best level we can. We can't expect our officers to go out there and be mental health professionals, but we can give them a better understanding of what it looks like when somebody is suffering from mental illness. And these are some of the things we can do to try to avoid triggering the incident or making it worse than what it is to get them into treatment. Another big thing is educating the community and society. Especially when you're talking about mental health issues, we get called constantly. Mental health isn't a crime. And many times people call because they're scared or it just doesn't look right or it's uncomfortable for them. And when we get there, there's a lot of times there's nothing we can do. People don't understand that, they think, well, you could just take somebody away and, get them treatment. That's not how this works. Obviously if they're exhibiting homicidal or suicidal behaviors, then yes, we can take them to the emergency room for a psych evaluation. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot you can do to force somebody into treatment. So then it comes down to how do you work with maybe family members and other organizations that provide a service on an outpatient basis, on outreach effort. And that's one thing we've really been trying to do with our homeless outreach team is to get people in the field with us to try to help these folks deal with the mental health issue, get them into housing, stabilize them, get their medications correct. Because many of these people, when they're on the appropriate medications, they're functioning members of our community.
I know, John, you've spoken about just a desire to see some of the resources financially the community does have put in different places, like social services. What are some of the front end changes that you would like to see to work to decrease negative police encounters and work to be more preventative?
I believe strongly that the program they currently have with Memorial Behavioral Health is fantastic, and I would love to see that dramatically expanded. In Eugene, Oregon, their mental health team responds to about 17% of the calls, but utilizes less than 1% of the budget. So it's something that has been demonstrated in other parts of the country as something that's extremely effective, and if we can get the grant money to fund it here, that is something that I think is going to be extremely beneficial. Another first point of contact that we have seen some issues in the past in Springfield and around the country is the school resource officer format. And oftentimes that leads to behaviors that normally would be handled within the school being criminalized and kids having records for something that 20 years ago they would have been suspended for. And so I think addressing that is another huge portion, because they're supposed to be resource officers. It's not supposed to be somebody in there to make arrests when kids are kids. So that's another thing that I'd like to see addressed, and I think that we can focus on here locally that'll make an improvement as far as kids' first interactions with police officers being better.
And Tammy, did you have anything just as far as some of those preventative front end responses that you would like to see from just that mental health perspective?
I agree with John and I agree with Chief Winslow. We need more resources first, because with everything, resources are needed for everything. And then we also need, even if we can deputize mental health professionals who come into these scenes and de-escalate situations, that will go a very, very long way. Because a situation like that happened to me recently, where I had to de-escalate a homicidal situation and in my office, and I won't say it went completely smoothly, but I was able to calm the person down before the police arrived. And so there's one thing that I'm really hoping that we can see more and more individuals in the police department or even elsewhere that can come into these situations and help out.
Sorry, go ahead, Chief Winslow.
No, and just to follow up on the doc said, obviously, we work with NAMI to provide our training to help us with the mental health issues. But the unfortunate thing for police officers, like, you wouldn't think that we get called to the psych ward for out of control patients in the psych ward at the hospital. The public thinks that when you take somebody to the hospital that they're getting medical treatment, they're good. But even the professionals have issues in trying sometimes to stabilize these folks, and we get called to that, and people don't understand that, And then to address John's issue, we sit down every year with District 186. I would advise you to talk to Ms. Gill about that, because we go over our rules and regs about how we get involved in the schools, and we specifically, officers do not get involved in issues unless they're in a criminal matter. Now, they may have get an involvement, but they don't make decisions on administration, punishment, or discipline. And many, many things are handled administratively. We do not want our officers in the discipline process at the school districts, and we outline that via contract with them, as well as conversation on what our goals and expectations are. So what you may be seeing around the country is not occurring here when it comes to that aspect of it. Again, that is one of those things that we are very clear. Enforcing school rules is one thing, and our officers will assist, but we're not going to arrest somebody for a school rule violation. And even if it is a criminal matter, a lot of times we give the school district the authority, unless it becomes a felony issue typically, or somebody is severely injured, that it becomes a school issue that they handle. And I think that if you talk to Ms. Gill or Mr. Wendover, you will see that's how things are done.
No, for sure. And so where do we go? And I'll just throw this to you, John. From here, conversations, a lot of people have just become very aware and trying to be more intentional about interactions and biases and things. It hasn't gone perfectly. There are systems in place that people are working to break down. But where do we go from here? How do we keep the conversation going? How do we not get complacent in terms of, okay, well, maybe we're ahead of the curve, but is there more we can do? What can we do in terms of, so how are you working to kind of keep those conversations up front without having to have something like what we witnessed last year at this time?
I think being intentional with your actions and promoting that mindset is extremely important. One of the biggest things for people who look like me and Chief is that we have behaviors and biases that we don't necessarily recognize. And being open to continuously addressing those and looking at those to see what you can improve, and not being standoffish when behaviors are brought to your attention is one of the biggest things that we can do as individuals to go forward. And as a community, I think making sure that we don't dismiss incidents and we address them and find out a way that they could have gone differently, I think that that's going to be a huge step. We've seen a few cases that while they are seem to be justified within the law, the community themselves are not happy with how they were handled. And I think that conversations need to be had around those for, while it may be legal to do so, is it ethically or morally correct to do so? And just being open to those conversations without feeling attacked and being willing to examine your behaviors and move on from them is the most important thing for, I think, everybody involved right now.
No, absolutely. And for you, Tammy, for people that have experienced trauma that they're not even aware of, from everything being in the news, from having so many of these conversations and having it be just around them more, are there things they can do to kind of work to understand their triggers, to address some of that trauma?
Yes. I want to give you an example. I've had an incident many years back, and that incident has re-traumatized me right now in life with everything going on on the media. And so whenever if I get pulled over, my heart rate starts to go up. And so the first thing to do is awareness, right? Just because your heart rate is going up when you get pulled over does not mean something bad is going to happen, right? That's the first step. And the second step is also understanding that, like, ways to calm yourself down, ways to deep breaths before the cop approaches the car. Because a lot of times what happens is you see that red and blue light flashing behind you, and boom, you go into a defensive mode, or you go into a state where you start talking back to the officer, and that just escalates situation. So calm down once you realize it's happening, calm down and try to stay in the present and look at what's happening right now, so that your body does not take you to the fight mode. The second thing too is, and I'm hoping that this is able to be instituted in the future. Again, if I get pulled up for instance, by Chief Winslow, now I know him. Now I know his face. Now there's an innate connection, and I see him as human. He sees me as human. Then I can have that conversation. Even if I'm going to get a ticket, it's not going to be a fight. So when we know each other, when we have these conversations, when we normalize gatherings like this, we're having right now, things get easier. And the community needs to do more and more of this, so that the trauma can start be desensitized in the population.
Chief Winslow, are there things in terms of, I know, the barbecue you guys have with the outlet, that to kind of bridge gaps with some of the young community, but are there things or steps that you guys are taking to either make it known that, the history and the experiences of the Black community when it comes to police, they're real. Like, these are real traumas, these are real things, and working toward having these conversations, like Tammy said, to humanize each other and to create kind of better ways for healthier communication.
No, and I agree with both what John and the doctor said about our actions have to be intentional. That's what we try to do here at Springfield Police Department. I would say when you look at our community policing program, or our community outreach that we do in our community, even through COVID, which set us back a lot, it's still above and beyond what any other department in the state does. And one of the national leaders in that, and we strive hard for that, and as we get past COVID, hopefully more and more of that will continue as we go on. But just last week, we did a pop-up barbecue with the Urban League and their youth development program, just trying to build those relationships. You talk about being in schools. We do kindergarten and cops, where basically every kindergarten class that fights in school for the last 3 years, we try to go in and we adopt those schools. We do book readings with them. We do fun activities with them. We try to humanize the badge, as you say. And that's what these efforts do, and you'll see more of those as we go out through the summer. Unfortunately, we're not going to do our junior police academy this year because we're still kind of under the COVID restrictions. We had to postpone that, as well as our teen academy and our citizen police academy. But all the other stuff we do, whether it's the Polar Pop program, whether it's our Cops and Boppers program that we're looking to bring back this summer, just things to get out there and to humanize that badge and build that relationship. But we're also in District 186, in the driver's ed programs, to try to teach people, just like the doc said, about how to interact on a traffic stop, what to expect, how is this going to go down, and try to alleviate some of that fear ahead of time. So, okay, I got pulled over. I kind of know how this is going to go. I know what I need to do. And again, like we always say, comply now, grieve later. The goal is for everybody to go home safely. It's not escalate this something. If you were treated wrong, we will address that going forward, bring that to our attention after the fact. But getting to an argument and escalating this on the side of the road, whether it's the police or the community doing it, it's not the appropriate action, and that's not what we want to do. And another thing, just building upon what we were talking about earlier about what are we doing at the police department. We're training all our folks in implicit bias. We all have biases. We all know that. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. But you need to be aware of your biases so they don't influence your decision making. So be conscious about it. Don't ignore it. And that's what we're trying to do, is teach our officers that, hey, bias term is not a negative thing. This is just something you need to be aware of and be honest with yourself, so that when you're making that decision, you consciously push that out of the way so it doesn't affect that decision-making process. Really, when we talk to our community, what we talk about out there is that to build the trust, it has to be a sustainable and consistent effort. And that's what we try to do with our staff walks and other outreach efforts that we have. Whether that's our NPO program and officers attending neighborhood association meetings to discuss problems and working collaboratively with them to resolve problems and issues before they become bigger. So those are some of the things we're trying to do. But again, the doc's 100% right. The efforts have to be intentional and they have to be continuous.
And what does that implicit bias training look like in terms of what the officers actually learn, or who's teaching it for them?
So we do have some trainers that are in-house that went out-house to go on what we call a train-the-trainer program. We are also looking at bringing in somebody from the outside to help with it, because it is that difficult. It is a difficult thing to teach, and it's sometimes barriers go up, or I should say defenses go up. And so it is something we are looking at, but we have professionals in the field that have trained our people and that would be willing to come in. We're also kind of waiting to see what iLetsB is going to do as far as a state mandate on that. So whatever we do bring in meets the mandate. Unfortunately, why the reform bill requires this type of training, it doesn't stipulate what the training is and what courses are certified.
And Tammy, just anything as we kind of get toward the end here that you would like to see as we move forward into just this next year and building on everything from this last year, all the conversations and the steps that have been taken, not only here, but across the country.
Okay, one thing I would like to see is the media, kind of like with Chief Winslow said. You said you've had barbecues. I didn't know about all of this. Like, all of this needs to be on the media as well. Just as the news media is showing the negative things that are happening in the police department all over the country, it needs to also show the positive things too as well. Because again, the implicit bias is something ingrained in our DNA. It's something that is tough to change. And so if we're constantly being exposed to negative stimuli, we're going to have negative responses. So we need to have a balance on each, so that everybody knows that, okay, hey, yeah, bad things may happen, but good things still happen as well. Like, giving people the benefit of the doubt whenever any situation is approached, either between cops and civilians or civilians and cops.
And I'll take off my moderator hat and be the journalist for a minute.
Yeah.
And part of what I've been doing is with our company has been public safety training. So making sure that we are reflecting our communities, similar like the way that we cover the police, and the way that John and other people have been critical of. Okay, well, they're only going to these communities. We also have to look at ourselves and make sure that when we're going into different areas of the community, that we're covering a representative amount of what's going on in that community, not just the crime that's going on one side of the community, and not just the good things that are going on in the other side of the community. And so that people see themselves reflected in our newspaper. So that is something that we do understand our role, that we are working on to improve and also not be be a part of the solution. So John, is there anything just for you as we wrap up here that you would like to see, just a big take home as far as what you'd like to see as we move forward to keep these conversations, keep working toward progress and healthy dialogue?
I think the biggest thing that I'd like to see going forward is not just the continued drive towards community involvement, community relations with the police department, but more community control of the police and the community having a say in how they're policed, and just a larger portion of attention and funding going towards that, rather than, say, surveilling and over policing these communities. That we don't need those type of resources put into these communities to prevent crime, because surveillance and over policing doesn't prevent crime. It oftentimes doesn't even stop it or catch the people who perpetrate it. We need to be putting these resources into the communities and figure out how we.
Okay, I think we're losing John here. I think no one else can hear him, right? Okay. So I think we're about at time. So I want to, unless John is coming back, but I don't think that's happening. So I just want to thank you guys for being a part of this conversation. I think it's really important to be able to have these conversations and these dialogues, and have those different voices from the community come together. John, are you back with us? Did you want to finish your thought before we go?
I'm not sure where my thought was cut off at exactly, because it was still telling me I was talking. But just more of a drive towards and continuing the community involvement with the police, but also having the community involved in the decision-making process as far as how they're policed, rather than putting those funds and investments towards more surveillance and more bodies, we need to see how those bodies are used.
Chief Winslow, did you have something you wanted to say?
I'd just like to respond to that. Obviously, I think that people need to be involved in our community to know what goes on in their neighborhoods, the crime that we try to deal with in their neighborhoods. And, there are some barriers there because fear of retaliation is a real thing, and that we have to anticipate that. But with that, get involved with your neighborhood association. Those are the active people that we work collaboratively with to resolve problems. They have a say in how they are policed. We are also investing in technology called ShotSpotter Connect that helps us develop and take our intelligence-led policing further along, and it helps avoid over-policing. That's exactly what that program is designed to do. So you have to embrace technology to make you smarter and better. We use data to decide where we're going to deploy our people, how we're going to deploy our people, and how we're going to address issues. So these decisions aren't made at random. You take that, hopefully, all that bias decision or subjectivity out of it by using algorithms and technology to take you where you need to be. But nothing replaces, human capital and one-on-one conversation and relationships and partnerships with our community to reduce crime and to resolve crime. So I would say that anybody out there, they should get involved. I'll tell you now that when you go to the neighborhood association, you usually see the same 25, 30 people there, but that neighborhood probably consists of well over 1,000 people. So there's plenty of opportunity to get involved. Additionally, I'm currently recruiting for police officers. Come be part of the active solutions that we are out there. We are trying to diversify our police department. We've made some good steps in that over the last few years, but come be part of it. We're going to be posting here next week, right after the holiday, for entry-level police officers. So anybody out there that can hear us, please step forward. It's a very challenging career, especially in these day and ages, but it's a very rewarding, and when done right, not a more noble profession than that of law enforcement.
And, Tammy, in terms of mental health resources for people that kind of leave this conversation and want to address some of the things that they've gone through this last year, any thoughts, guidance for them as we wrap up?
Yes, for individuals who are looking for mental health resources regarding the trauma that's been happening or that's happened in the past, there are community resources in town, in Springfield, where you can, with Medicaid card or Medicare card, you can get help. There are private practices out there, including mine, where you can get help for a much smaller fee, where you can get counseling. And a whole lot of professionals are trained in trauma, arc and regulation, and how to regulate that trauma. So you can come in and get help. There is help out there. There are medications out there for anxiety related to all of this. It's okay not to be okay.
And then just to wrap up here, John, for you, anyone that wants to kind of get involved with some of being a voice, being an ally with some of the work that you and Black Lives Matter and others in the community are doing, guidance for them as to where they can go to be a part of that.
Definitely reach out to Black Lives Matter Springfield, Sunshine Clemens. They are currently doing a number of things as far as the Speak Out for Gregory program for the incident that happened in Chatham a few months ago. And if somebody's wanting to get involved, that's directly something that is being worked on right now, that they can use all the funds and assistance that they can get.
Okay. Well, thank you guys all for being here. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate everyone having, sometimes not the most fun conversations, but I think they're important and I think they matter to the community. So thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Natalie. We appreciate it too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.